What's going on, YouTube Nation? I'm the Coffee Bean GM. So this is going to be our second episode of the WitchFire trilogy campaign diary. So I'm doing this for those people who don't really have that 3 to 4 hour time span in their day to watch an entire live player, live action, whatever I call it, game that I was hosting here on the internet for a couple of friends. I myself generally don't have that kind of time to devote into watching something. My time is pretty limited, so what I do to actually have a chance to watch something, I'm trying to catch up on some old shows and whatnot. So if you don't have the time to watch, a live play of my older video and stuff like that, I really don't mind. That's totally cool. But I thought I'd throw this together as a way for everybody to kind of keep track of what's going on with the characters, see what's going on. So if you did have time to, ever catch an episode, then you would pretty much be up to speed. So our last game, which was session number 2, it was last Sunday. So I'm actually doing this video a little bit later than I wanted to. It's just been a crazy ass week. But our last session, like I said, was last Sunday, and we had one player who lost his voice. So instead of making him sit here and being able to unhear him or not hear him or anything, he kind of bowed out. And we had another player who was having combat issues with his computer. Basically his internet was, pretty sketchy, and then his data ran out, so he was in for like the first quarter of the game or so. That would be Roland's player, the priests. So then he kind of had to bow out. So it really ended up just coming down to both Zach and Latrix, who ran most of this session, it worked out pretty well because the two of them, it kind of created that bonding moment between the two characters. They definitely had some connections prior to the game that were filled out, and they have a little bit of a friendship. But this one kind of solidified it a bit more. Just being able to focus on these two characters as they went out and did some research and started looking around the city. Both, I think it helped out the players get a little more into the character, as well as get the characters familiar with each other. So it was really cool to see that. Excuse me. So the session started out with everybody was in the Cathedral of Marrow, and Eustace, that's the player who his voice was not working. So he ended up in the previous session, Eustace, the character, decided that he was going to run a lecture for the Museum of Cyrus. So he was easy to kind of pop out of this session, and in the background I had him running down the stairs trying to fix up his shirt, and fast as he's kind of dancing across the floor and trying to get out of this place in time so he could make his lecture. Excuse me, his lecture there. And so he was quick and easy to kind of pop out. And then it ended up just being Roland, Latrix, and Zach, and the three of them spoke briefly with Father Dumas, who's really worried about these grave robberies that have been going through the city, and he gave them a slip of paper letting know which graves and where they were that were robbed, and wanted them to look into the matter, see what they could dig up and what they could find out about, ultimately so that he could either rest his nerves knowing that it was really no foul play, or maybe they could kind of get down to the heart of the issue and hopefully just fix it. So he ended up giving the slip of paper, and they headed out. The first place they ended up going to was the Northern Graveyard, and there was 2 burial plots there. Unfortunately, I don't remember the top of the name. The Montansada family and Sylvia family, I think they were. But they ended up going out to this Northern Graveyard, which is a pretty average graveyard. There were some nice tombs on there, some of the lower class, a lot more middle class, your typical city graveyard. Very well kept. And they got out there, and as they kind of were coming up the main path, they saw 2 people. They saw the caretaker of the cemetery caretaker in his shack up there, this old, weathered, leathery looking man who was sitting on a bucket, and he had a flask of some sort in a brown bag that he was drinking. And then off into the distance, they saw another man who looked like he was dressed in guard regalia, kneeling down, and he looked like he was putting flowers on a grave and saying a prayer. They decided to come up to this old man and talk with him. He introduced himself as the caretaker of the cemetery. His name was Old Gum. The players talked back and forth with him before finally realizing that this guy was pretty much just an insane old man. He kept telling them about how he was nearly 100 years old. When they asked about the graves, he said he had no clue what they were talking about, and he hadn't seen nothing. And then he turned around and said that he saw a woman in white who was dancing through the graveyard. And, they started asking a little bit more about these graves that were dug up, and he was saying that he knew about them and that they were down yonder. And then he would stop them and then start lecturing them about how old he was again. And, if they asked, what was going on with these graves or whatever, he acted like he had no clue what was going on. So he was basically a very old man who, kind of like from dementia or Alzheimer's or something, and, just kind of suffered that old forgetfulness. He just really couldn't process what was still going on around him. On top of that, he was drinking like a fiend, so he was probably plastered at that moment. Eventually, the players just said, screw it, and, set him on his way and went out and started searching around, found these two grave sites that were dug up. Looked like they were cleanly dug up by shovel, had the clean cut sides. And then on top of that, they kind of looked around for tracks and stuff, and one of them showed larger bare footprints, not bare animal, but like barefooted human footprints around it. And the other one had smaller human footprints, also bare. So they figured it was either these creatures as like zombies coming up from the dead and walking away, or else whoever was doing this was doing it in bare feet. They didn't have a whole lot to go with after that. And then as they were headed out of this graveyard, getting ready to head out to a different area, this guard kind of came up to him, introduced himself as Captain Hellstrom. He's the captain of the city guard. And, he chatted with them a little bit, asking them, what they were doing. Once they introduced themselves and mentioned that they were working for Father Dumas, he thanked them. And he explained that the city guard they don't have the people, the resources, or the time to really devote to a few grave robberies. As far as he was concerned, he was pretty sure it was just typical grave scavengers who were coming in, digging up bodies, and then selling those bodies back to the Museum of Cyrus for research, dissection, medical stuff, things like that. It's well known that the Museum of Cyrus, being a more intellectual sort of following, they're much more into the education and the research and the sciences, that sort of stuff. So it made sense that they would be interested in fresh bodies, or even older ones for that matter, and being able to use them for research. Usually the church doesn't ask where the bodies came from, sort of a don't ask, don't tell sort of thing. So it's kind of common for people to go out to the graveyards who are hard up on money, dig up some bodies, sell them to the Church of the Church of Cyrus, Museum of Cyrus, and then be on their way. And Captain Hellstrom seemed pretty confident that that was what was going on around here. So, he thanked the players for looking into this for Father Dumas, since he just didn't have the time or resources to do so, but he was willing to, answer any questions the PCs may have. He invited them down to his barracks at one time if, they needed something or whatever. So, he seemed like a pretty decent guy. He just doesn't have the time or resources to do this. On the way out, the players tried to avoid Old Gum the best they could, but he still got cornered by him a little bit, and he yapped their ears off, confused them a little bit more, annoyed them a little bit more, and eventually they just got the hell out of there and away from this old fart who didn't know what the hell was going on around them. From there, they headed off to the Gaddick family farm. This is a small turnip farm on the outside of the east gates, and it's run by a man named Bern Gaddick, who is kind of the man of the house. When they get out there, they learn that Bern's father, Hagar Gaddick, was the body that is missing. It was just in a simple plot out back, that's that family farm, so they bury their dead right there on the land. And then, the players got out there, and it was the same exact thing. It was on the edge of a cornfield. Some of the other family members were out, working on the farm and stuff like that. And the players looked around, same exact thing. It was dug up by shovels, nice and clean, cut down to the grave. And, when they searched around on the ground again, they found some bare footprints of a human foot, bare human feet footprints. Yeah. And they saw them walking away from the grave and then off into the cornfield. Latrix kind of dug around a little bit, but ultimately kind of lost the trail once it got into the cornfield, so she wasn't able to get too far. They asked a little bit about, to Bern what was going on and stuff. He just explained that, he went to bed one night and woke up the next morning. The body was gone. He hadn't heard anything or whatever. And that's when his son, a young little lad, kind of hurried over and told Latrix that he saw his papa get up and walk away. And he kind of pointed through these cornfield. And Byrne just kind of dismissed this as, the young kid's imagination, and maybe that mixed in with his fright of, this grave, and then now this grandfather being missing, and, this rumory sort of thing, his imagination running wild. Latrix, on the other hand, wasn't so sure. She kind of took it with a grain of salt, and with that idea that, the younger kids, yeah, they have wild imagination and stuff, but a lot of the times what they have or what they see there's a bit of truth to it. So she kept that in the back of her mind. From there, they decided to kind of head back into the city. They were finding the same basic pattern around all three of these graves so far, and they were sort of like, you know, they didn't really want to waste their time going to all these different places when it so far was pretty much a solid pattern. So their idea was to just kind of, as players, they just wanted to hit a couple, see if there was anything different going on, at any of these other grave sites. So I sent them from there. I sent them over to the Sunbright Estate. When they got there, they saw a very rich-looking gentleman out front talking with some other people, look like maybe butlers of the house or maids of the house, stuff like that. And the players come up, and this guy really didn't have any two shits to give about him, and was just kind of bushing them through. He had no interest in stopping to talk about what was going on. He told the players that the tomb was in the back of the house, like a fancier sort of tomb that they bury the bodies within. If they wanted to go ahead and go look at it, they can, just to get them out of the way. And he kind of wandered off, not really paying much more attention to them and not answering any of their questions or anything like that, just stating that he didn't have time for it right now. So he went off on his way, and the two players kind of came around the back side of this manor house where there was a large party getting set up. There was maids and butlers and party people all getting everything set up, these large feasts being laid out and everything like that. And it's all in preparation for the longest night festival that's coming. And from there, they kind of made their way through this crowd over to this tomb. And the first thing you noticed that was the stone doors on this thing were just obliterated apart. Scorch marks covering the walls and stuff. So it was something a little more different from what they've seen so far. Once they got inside, they could see that most of the heirlooms, the relics of this person who was dead in here, which was Lord Elgar Sunbright, I believe it was, the Radnor Sunbright. But they saw, again, this sarcophagus on the top. The lid of this thing was blown apart in pieces on the floor. The body was gone. But there was nothing missing. None of the relics, none of the monies, or anything this guy was buried with. Everything was still there. Only thing that was missing was the bodies. So they kind of realized that whoever was doing this obviously wasn't doing it to go after the riches or, just robbing the dead, basically. They left everything there. Latrix searched around. She saw a bit of scrap of some sort of white fabric that was caught on the corner of the sarcophagus in a relic that was kind of like a little statue thing. It got caught on the tip of this thing. So she took that as a bit of a clue, kind of looked into it. It was basically a real simple white fabric, nothing uncommon. Usually stuff that a lot of the clergy people from Merrill wear, like that. Just a nice soft cotton sort of material. So she pocketed that. They tried to ask around this party a little bit to some other people, see if anybody knew what was going on. But again, nobody really cared. Nobody seemed to have any interest in them, shuffled them away. When they went up to the lady of the house, whatever, to ask her, she thought they were somebody who was supposed to be delivering like flowers or something. And being that they didn't show up with what they were supposed to, she ushered them away and really didn't listen to what they had to say and kind of pushed them out of the way. So seeing this, the players were like, screw it, we have what we need here. Let's head out to the Eastern Boneyard, see what we can find there, and then we'll head back to the Church of Marrow. So they went out to this Eastern Graveyard. This place is just a total shithole. This is where the poor, per se, bury their dead. Generally, these bodies are just kind of thrown in the ditch, thrown a little dirt on top of it, and called it good. The grave sites and the grave markers are nothing more than a large rock or a couple twigs that have been twined together to form a cross. The smell of death is everywhere. Bodies, bits and pieces of them kind of lay around. Rats and maggots, everything kind of crawls across the ground. Just a complete shithole of a cemetery. Nobody upkeeps this thing or anything. When they got out there, Latrix seemed a little more interested in what was going on with her more witchy sort of background, whereas Zach was completely disgusted by this place. As they kind of looked around, there really was no telling what graves might have been dug up, which ones weren't. I mean, the whole place, half the bodies were barely even buried to begin with. They did see a guy off into the distance, though, who was crouched down over top of a body. It looked like he was doing something. So Latrix ran up there and confronted him. Then he kind of turned around. It looked like maybe he was looting the dead or something. It wasn't quite sure what he was doing. But when she tried to talk to him, he just kind of shrugged. He wouldn't speak back or anything. Eventually, she found out he was a mute. Wasn't able to talk. When he did try to talk, it just kind of came out in weird slurs and stuff that she couldn't understand. But through pantomime and kind of making motions and stuff like that, he kind of motioned that he knew what she was asking. but he wanted to be paid in return, and he kind of made that motion. He wanted some money or some food. So she ended up giving him a couple copper bits, and he showed him up where these two bodies, burials, graves, I guess, per se, were, and where he's seen, and he kind of pantomimed a woman with long hair, and he kind of swirled around like he was wearing a dress or something, kind of showing that idea that he saw a woman with long hair and in a dress dancing around up here. And so Latrix kind of dug around again. They weren't able to get a whole lot from this, with the whole bodies and everything, but they still were able to kind of connect it to the same idea that this woman in a white dress who was kind of dancing around, she seemed to be moving from place to place. Graveyards, there didn't seem to really be any necessary rhyme or reason to these bodies yet, and they weren't sure what exactly was all going on. But they figured there was one more plot or one more grave that was dug up at the Fullett family farm. So they decided, might as well hit that last one that was on the way back into the city to speak with Father Dumas. Excuse me. So they headed out to this Fullett family farm, and when they got out there, they saw this kind of ramshackle cabin on the outskirts. Dozens, well, not dozens, I guess, about a dozen kids just running and screaming around the yard, and this huge, fat, bloated woman sitting on the porch in a chair. It looked like she was kind of like knitting something or working on something in her hands. And she just kind of stared at the players with these tiny little black beady eyes as they walked up the main walkway towards this porch. Over in the corner, and they had some kids who were fighting with sticks, other ones who were wrestling around. A bunch of them were on top trying to ride a goat around, just being regular pain in the ass kids all over the place. And this woman would just constantly stop whatever she was doing and scream at the top of her lungs, yelling at these kids to get off the goat or stop hitting so-and-so with a stick and to go do their chores, that kind of stuff. She seemed to have no control over these kids, though. Also, from the trees and from the porch swing and from the banisters and kind of laid out all over were these weird little trinkets made of what looked to be almost like dream weavers, Indian dream weavers, twigs kind of with strings between them, feathers and stuff, hung all over the place. And she mentioned that these were to ward off witches. She seemed to be a very superstitious woman. And as Latrix was starting to kind of look around, she started to feel that very queasy sickness in her stomach that, whatever this lady did or whatever she has, it definitely tended to ward off people with magical powers, such as Latrix. So she really wasn't feeling that great. And this woman kept a close watch on Latrix. She noticed her sweating a little bit. And, she kind of passed it off, Latrix did, as she was sick and not feeling very well. But, they wanted to look into this grave that was dug up, which was this old woman's husband. So she kind of told them in the backyard, pointed them where to head out. And they got out there, seeing that this area was all dug up and stuff. Pretty much came up with the same sort of clues as before. It looked like it was kind of dug out, blasted apart a little bit. They seen the bare footprints. No body was around. So kind of Latrix started yelling over at one of the kids to try and get a question. And he kind of come over staring at her. And she kind of asked him, if he had seen or heard anything. He got this big, wide, kind of mischievous sort of smile on his face. Ran over and kicked her right in the shin. And so she kind of reached down to grab at her shin. Another kid jumped on her back. And, within just a few moments, there was a dozen kids climbing all over Latrix, pulling at her ears and poking at her, wrestling with her. They were just trying to play with her, really, and just being a pain in the ass. They weren't trying to harm her or nothing. But they eventually kind of dragged her down to the ground. And over in the corner, Zach's like horrified. All he can think is that Latrix is going to use her hateful defecation on these kids and make them all shit themselves and blow them apart everywhere. So he's like freaking out, trying to get the kids to get off of Latrix before she snaps. Eventually, he points out a goat who was trying to get away, and all the kids jumped off of Latrix and hauled ass to go get this goat that was trying to get away, to go play with the goat again. And Latrix kind of got herself up and brushed herself back off, got her composure, looking a little more miffed, but she didn't hateful defecate the kids, so that's good. And there was still one younger girl that Latrix was able to grab, kind of turn around and talk to her for a few moments. Excuse me. This girl didn't really know or see too much, but she did mention that she found something, and she kind of held out her hand towards Latrix. And when Latrix took it, there was a small little green earring, looked sort of like an emerald earring, teardrop shaped. And she said that she found it near the grave. She didn't know what it was exactly or anything like that, but she thought maybe it would help the players find her papa and what had happened. So Latrix, again, would take having this white piece of fabric that she had, she kind of took the earring, folded those up together, put them away in her pouch, and they decided to head back to the Cathedral of Marrow, maybe speak with Father Dumas. But as they were headed back, they kind of Zach started to kind of connect the dots a little bit, and he was pretty sure that somehow down through the line this connected back to Father Dumas, because this old witchy, or this old fat woman on this porch there, mentioned that Father Dumas's sister was a witch, and it was called the Corvis Five, or the Corvis Coven, sorry. And about 20 years ago or so, there was 5 witches who were put to death, and she mentioned that her husband was a juror on this trial. And from there, they realized that Father Dumas might have something more tied to this than they had originally thought, being that his sister, per se, was a witch. And this woman mentioned that she was, this Father Dumas' sister was, one of the people in this coven, was actually the head of the coven. They were all eventually tried for witchcraft, and they were all killed through beheading out in the swamps and all buried. So they kept that, kind of thinking about it. But this woman continued to say that she, trusted Father Dumas, that he was on the right path, that he was a good man. It was just his sister was corrupt, evil, and so forth. So with that in mind, they ended up headed back towards the Cathedral of Marrow for dinner time and to speak with Father Dumas. And Zach was kind of playing with this idea in the head that either he has something to do with it or somebody there has something to do with this. So as they got back to this cathedral and they sat down for dinner, were chatting with Father Dumas a bit. And when they finally kind of confronted him about it, about his sister being a witch and what was going on, he did mention that his sister, was tried as a witch for the Corvis Coven, and that his sister was also Alexia's, mother, being that Father Dumas is her uncle. And they kind of listened to it, but Father Dumas insisted that this whole thing was pretty much just a setup. Not that this Corvis Coven witchcraft trial and everything was pretty much just a setup for the magistrate at the time, who was Magistrate Borlock. Father Dumas wasn't sure who exactly he was in league with or what the whole purpose of this was, but he believes that the magistrate, he rose through rank really powerful, or really fast, up to, a magistrate standing. And he wasn't sure, Father Dumas wasn't, how this happened or what exactly went down to do this. But what he did know was he was insistent that his sister was not a witch. That whole thing was just bullshit, along with this other Corvis Cove and the other 4 people. Again, he, insisted they're not a witches. They were good people, they were falsely accused, they were falsely put on trial, and they were falsely found guilty. Through one way or another, the magistrate pulled some strings, and ultimately all 5 of these women were beheaded as witches. He mentions that Magistrate Borlock worked close with the King Victor Elthorn at the time, who was a very evil, despised king. He was started eventually searching out people as witches and witchcraft to try to eliminating it from the land. He was trying all sorts of people. This king was extremely evil, a very powerful tyrant. And as it got worse and worse, the king's brother, King Leto, I believe it is, King Leto kind of ended up forming a coup, taking this king out. And with that, he was supposed to be tried and put to death, the King Elthorn was. But he ended up somehow escaping in what they called the hot air balloon. And along with him, most of his Secret Service men, most of his followers, his magistrates, his lords, those kind of people, all kind of dispersed, disappearing. A lot of the ones that they were able to round up and put to trial and kill, they did, but a lot of them got away. Nobody really sure where they went. And that's one of the ones with Father Dumas. He wasn't too sure what exactly happened to Magistrate Borlock. He's assuming that he went with King Elthorn maybe, or he hightailed it out of there and got out of there for the time. But with that, King Elthorn headed out in this hot air balloon across the wastes to the east and was never heard from again. King Leto is now in power. The cities are doing quite well. It's a pretty peaceful kingdom. the economy, everything's looking up. So this all ultimately turned out very well, aside from Father Dumas losing his sister. So the players kind of listened to this, and as they were still not really uh, not really believing all this, I guess they still had a hint of suspicion in there, and kind of trying to decide what to do with it. They heard the door open in the distance, and then around the corner came Alexia. She had a couple books in her hands that she set down on a table. And she came in not really following any of these priestly or religious orders for this church or anything like that. And sat down at the table. Well, headed over to sat down, but Zach hurried up and went around the table and pulled out the chair for Alexia and kind of offered her a seat. And he was trying to get a look at her hands to see if she had any blisters or dirt or anything like that he would notice from perhaps her digging up these graves. And he seemed to have that strong suspicion on her, both with the earrings and with the white dress and stuff like that. But as he looked down, she was completely clean. There was no blisters, no calluses. Her fingers were clean. Everything was nice and orderly. She really didn't have any signs. So, he was like, okay, pressed her and stuff. And as she kind of threw her hair back to get ready to get down and eat her dinner for the night, he noticed that she had an earring in her right ear, sort of that greenish color and a teardrop. It matched perfectly with the one that Latrix had in her pocket. And as he looked at her other ear, that earring was missing. And that is where I hung the session at. So from there, the players are going to be picking up the next session at the table here, finishing off dinner with Father Dumas, and doing whatever they want to say or do or talk to Alexia. I'm not sure where they want to take it from there. So ultimately, the session went pretty well. Like I said, I got a good chance for Latrix and Zach to coincide a little bit, get to know each other a little more, strengthen up that role playing between the two. They got to meet Father Hellstrom, who was the city guard. Certainly might be a good connection for him. They got to meet Old Gum, the crazy old bastard in the Grim Cemetery, who they didn't really like. A couple of other NPCs that probably really won't come up that much, if at all, again. But again, it's just more connections for him to have, more people for him to talk to and interact with. So that was nice. They got to explore the city and the graveyards a little bit. And ultimately, the most important thing is they got to learn a little bit about the history of the city, with the Corvis Coven, these witch beheadings that was going on, a little bit more about King Winterelthorn, who was ultimately dethroned from this king position and was taken over by his brother Leto. The kingdom is now doing quite well under his rule, and that the king is, the former King Winter is often dead in the wasteland somewhere. Nobody really cares at that point because he's gone and everything's going well. It's been, like I said, quite a while. So where they pick it up from here, I'm not really sure. They will, there's obviously plenty more within the campaign and what's going on. But I'm curious to see how the players take that as we pick things up as they're sitting here at the table, and how they confront Alexia about the earring, or how they interact with Father Dumas in front of all this. It'll be cool to see. The next session is this coming Sunday night at 9 o'clock. For anybody who's interested in tuning in and watching, that would be awesome. We'd love to hear feedback from people. And join us in watching these games. I should have all the players back. Everything's good. I know Brennan was able to get his internet fixed up, and Wes was able to get his voice back. I don't think he's croaking anymore. So all should be good and ready to go. So thanks for watching this video, guys. I hope that you get a chance to watch some of these live plays or tune in with us one night. If not, maybe you enjoy these 20-30 minute recaps of the session, what's going on, and that you're able to kind of keep up with the story and have fun with it. For anybody who's familiar with the WitchFire trilogy, kind of look at your books or remember what you remember of that campaign, and look at how I'm reflecting it and running it as well. I'm changing some stuff to fit both the players and the Shadow of the Demon Lord setting and how I want to run it, because I just do it differently. So again, thank you very much. You guys have a kick-ass day. Keep rolling those d20s, and thank you.